The Journey of an Apprentice Pilgrim, Series Divine Footsteps. Book 2, written by Felipe Chavarro Polania, narrated by Louise Robinson, Brian Wilson, Christine Stevens, Otoniel Lewis, Marcus Burton, Luke Harris, Martin Payne, Michael Owen, Maxie Holmes. Kadmiel and the interpretation of the 4 inscriptions. 2 weeks had passed, and Kadmiel had carefully followed the instructions Asael had given him, for he had sought work as a sower in the field, which Eleazar had indicated to him. However, he had not yet been able to begin work in his chosen trade, for it so happened that the owner of the field that Eleazar had indicated to him was a very rich man and had gone on a long journey. So Kadmiel decided to try his luck by looking for work as a sower in other fields to which Eleazar had recommended him. Early one morning, Kadmiel went to a field where he met the foreman, who, looking at his hands, dismissed him because he did not have the marks of someone with the experience to do his job. The next day, he hurried to look for work in another field, which was on the outskirts of the city. However, despite his efforts, he was again rejected by the foreman of that field because he did not have the experience required to enter his work. As the days went by, Kadmiel was only disqualified by the foreman in charge of the city's fields. Some disqualified him for his lack of experience, for the marks on his hands, for his young age, and even for his appearance. Until one fine day, on his way home from Eleazar, Kadmiel walked slowly with his head lowered so that he paid no attention to the road he was walking on.
By what criteria do the foremen disqualify me? If it is because of my experience, all of them were once inexperienced in their trade, and in spite of that, someone gave them a vote of confidence, so that today they are masters of their trade. How absurd this is! More if it is because of my origin. Do not their best carpets come from distant lands, and their best horses and fine linen from Egypt, and their cedar, cypress, and sandalwood not cut in Lebanon? No vocation is valued according to where it comes from, but by the burning desire to learn and excel.
Distracted in his thoughts, he walked wearily, feeling his doubts making his heart heavier. Suddenly, as he looked towards the horizon, he came upon the trees that crowned the hills and remembered his journey through the wilderness of Bethzalel. Then he resolved to go on his way until he came to the house of Eleazar. Then, seeing the old man standing outside the house, he went up to him and said,
"Please recommend me to another field that I may begin my work as soon as possible."
The old man said to him,
"I have been informed that you have been to how many other camps have you gone to in search of work?"
"There are so many that I have lost count,"
said the boy.
"Well, for what reason have you been turned away from these camps?"
"Almost everywhere I have been disqualified because of my inexperience. However, my greatest frustration was when I visited the camp of a man named Avigdor. After testing me and seeing my willingness to work, he examined my hands and laughingly said to his foreman, "Ah, but look at his hands. They are not the hands of a reaper." Then he looked at me steadily and said, "You have no experience, my boy, for your hands do not bear the marks of someone who has plowed the field. Sorry, look for another trade that suits your experience and abilities." And he dismissed me, without giving me a chance to object to his arguments.
The old man stared at him and said,
"I understand, but what is your hurry to start right now?"
The boy felt as if his whole chest had suddenly compressed, for he was afraid to tell Eleazar all about his dreams in the desert. And so it came to pass that after a brief silence, Kadmiel resolved to tell Eleazar all about the skin tube he had found and about his 2 dreams in the desert. Then the young man recovered his spirits and said,
"On my journey through the desert of Bethzalel, I found a skin tube inside an abandoned camp. After I took it and carried it with me that same night while I was sleeping, I had 2 very strange dreams."
And Kadmiel told both dreams to Eleazar. When he had finished telling them, it happened that Kadmiel opened his shepherd's bag and took out the leather tube with its inscriptions and showed it to Eleazar. When Eleazar saw the leather tube and the inscriptions on it, he was astonished for almost an hour, and his thoughts puzzled him. Kadmiel spoke to him, saying,
"Please tell me what you have been able to interpret about these inscriptions, for I know that you speak different languages."
"Like you, I can read the inscription written in our native tongue which says, 'A new nature.' I can also clearly distinguish 2 other inscriptions written in other languages which say, 'The great exchange and wisdom of the living God.'" The other inscriptions are written in languages I do not know.
Then the old man opened the leather tube and took out the papyrus, and after examining it carefully, he said,
It is evident that this papyrus contains a very important message, for it has been written in very fine material, and its writing was done with calamus, which remains intact until now.
The old man paused and then continued.
Unfortunately, the language used to write on this papyrus is very ancient, and I will not be able to interpret it for you. However, I know a man who will undoubtedly be able to interpret it, and his name is Zur. He is the same man you have been waiting for since you came to Sagnit. He will be able to decipher it, for he was raised in this city at the feet of Ashir.
The young man interrupted him, saying,
Ashir? Wasn't this man Asael's mentor himself?
The old man nodded his head slightly.
Ashir, he was Zur and Asael's mentor for a long time. Also, when I first met him, I noticed that among his possessions, he always carried a book written using symbols that I believe to be the same as these. Now I can understand your eagerness to start working in the fields. I suppose you want to begin your work as a sower, since you think it is the work that concerns the first dream. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
How do you intend to interpret the other 4 inscriptions?
I don't know, sir.
Well, in that case, take my advice. For we do not yet know the day and hour when Zur will return from his journey. Start working as a flock guard. In this way, you will not need any recommendation, for this trade is of low esteem among the inhabitants of this city. Moreover, with 3 months' wages, you will be able to pay the interpreters for each inscription. Thus, your heart will not faint and you will not lose your hope.
Then the young man bowed his head, and after a brief pause said,
So that means that I must change the road to reach my goal, right?
That's right. No path in the life of a man of purpose is a straight path. On the contrary, it is a road full of unevenness and almost always to go up higher. You will have to go down a little.
Having said this, the old man got up and left. Then Kadmiel also went to his room and threw himself on his cot and began to meditate on the advice that Eleazar had given him. And after giving Eleazar's words much thought, it seemed reasonable to him to begin work as a flock keeper. So he decided that at daybreak, he would set out to find the place where he would begin his work. He also decided that he would have to work in the evenings in order to raise the money he needed to pay the interpreters of the papyrus and for his food and clothing so that he would not be a burden to Eleazar. Thus, his expenses would not absorb the profits he would have to invest in the work of the interpreters. Finally, tired from his day, he fell asleep. When he awoke, it was early morning. He sat up and meditated on the scrolls as usual. Then he ran to get ready to begin his quest. Then he left Eleazar's house and set out for the fields where the flocks were grazing. So he went, and when he came to the fields, he searched the whole length of them until he found a place to graze goats by day and to guard the flocks by night. And it came to pass that that part of the field belonged to Malka, who was a kinswoman of Eleazar. And so Kadmiel began to work long hours every day, week after week, until the first 2 months were completed. And it came to pass that one day, Malka, coming from a long journey, came to Sagnit and met with her servant, the steward of all her workers. And when she had inspected the place, she asked her servant,
"Who is this young man?"
And the servant answered and said,
"He is a young man from Bozum who is staying at the house of your brother-in-law Eleazar. We hired him because he is a very persistent boy, and he persuaded us to hire him to herd the goats by day and by night as a keeper of the flocks."
Then Malka asked the servant,
"Does this boy speak our language and know our customs?"
"The customs he has learned easily, but the language he does not yet understand easily."
Then Malka said to Kadmiel through an interpreter,
"My son, I am the widow of Eliyahu, the brother of Eleazar. You will not lack for work in this place, for my ears have heard of your great persistence. You will surely achieve your dreams, for you have taken the bridge between your goals and your achievements, determination. Therefore come here and eat and drink with my stewards and servants."
And the boy sat down with all the servants and stewards of that field, and ate and drank until he had eaten his fill. Then he got up to continue working in the field. And Malka commanded his stewards and servants, saying,
"Teach him our language and instruct him in every work he chooses, and do not reprove him in his desire to learn."
Then Malka met with Atzel, the most illustrious of all her stewards, and gave him special charge of Kadmiel, for he reminded her of her husband Eliyahu. And it came to pass, as they were talking, that one of his servants overheard him and told the others in the camp. And from that time they abhorred the boy and would not treat him peaceably. So Kadmiel worked with Malka's servants and butlers until the 3 months were up. When he had been paid for his work, Kadmiel returned with Eleazar to go to the interpreters. And it came to pass, when the boy saw Eleazar, that he said to him,
I have followed your advice to the letter. Now I beg you to take me to the interpreters, so that I may receive their advice about the inscriptions and the papyrus.
The old man stared at him and said,
You have taken my advice, my son, and I am ready to help you. I will take you to Amitai, a native of the city of Byzantium. Perhaps he can interpret the inscriptions and the papyrus for you. But always remember this: wisdom and humility always go together. So listen carefully to what Amitai has to say to you.
So they set off for Amitai's vineyard. Kadmiel obtains the 4th inscription. They began to walk through the city until they came to a beautiful vineyard. There lived the sage they were looking for. Amitai, reclining on a chair, waited, staring at those who worked in his vineyard.
Greetings, dear Amitai,
said Eleazar. Amitai bowed his head slightly and continued in silence, looking back at his workers. And after a brief pause, he finally turned to Eleazar and Kadmiel and said,
Is this the apprentice of whom you have told me so much?
Kadmiel blanched, and Eleazar replied,
Yes, I have brought him with me, for he has an important matter to consult with you.
All right, my boy. I'll listen to you carefully. But first, have you brought 3 months' wages for a century?
The young apprentice opened his mouth soundlessly. He drew back for a moment as if he intended to run away, and after a brief pause, he recovered his courage and replied,
Yes, I have brought it with me. However, I still do not understand the reason for paying such a high price. Besides, I would first like to have a guarantee that I will receive the interpretation.
After having said this, Amitai nodded his head and replied,
Don't forget that the value of advice surpasses that of precious stones. A timely advice or interpretation will keep you from falling prey to ignorance. Never forget that what you do not know and ignore about a matter is of greater value than what you think you know. To achieve what you want, you must narrow the gap between what you know and what you don't know. We all have a choice between being ignorant and being wise. And we only begin to be wise when we realize our ignorance and our need for counseling. Therefore, do not hesitate to pay a high price for the counseling or interpretation you need to achieve your desire. Most great and hidden things that you do not know are but a counsel away from being discovered.
Embarrassed, feeling Eleazar's reproachful gaze upon him, Kadmiel took the sack containing 3 months' wages as a flock guard and handed it to Amitai. Immediately, Amitai looked at the young man and said,
Now, my boy, refer your matter to me so that I can help you. I'm sure that if I don't know the answer, I will know someone who can help you.
Kadmiel then told him all about his journey through the wilderness of Bethzalel and how he entered an abandoned camp and found the leather tube with the 7 inscriptions. He also told him how, after finding the leather tube with the papyrus inside, he had 2 dreams. As the young man told Amitai his whole story, the old man's grim face became cheerful and kind. It was as if the boy's story and dreams filled his life with hope, so he willingly listened. Finally, the young man opened his shepherd's bag and took out the leather tube and handed it to Amitai. And it came to pass that as the old man took the tube in his hands, a heavy rain fell on the vineyard. Immediately, the 3 of them sought shelter in a small hut nearby. Then the old man began to examine the leather tube carefully and asked,
What inscriptions have you been able to interpret?
The young man answered with some suspicion,
We have the interpretation of 3 inscriptions. The first is a new nature, the second is the great exchange. And finally, the last inscription is wisdom of the living God.
How interesting, for I have been able to make out in Greek the inscription which reads, the angular stone.
The young man did not try to suppress the emotion he felt at knowing the meaning of another inscription. Then the old man opened the leather tube and carefully took out the papyrus, and as he examined it, he shook his head and said,
I've been able to make out in Greek the inscription which says, the angular stone. Whoever owned this papyrus must be related to the Egyptian culture, considering that he has used the king's flower to carry this message. Be prepared, my boy, and do not lose hope. For though I cannot help you with the interpretation of this papyrus, I can assure you that what you are about to discover is indeed sacred. I am amazed, for in all the days of my pilgrimage, I have never seen anyone use a hieratic papyrus in our time.
Kadmiel sighed with relief, as if his strength had been restored. Then he started to speak, but Amitai's raised hand told him to be silent.
As for your dream and the inscriptions you have been able to interpret, listen to me carefully, for I have been able to discern the significance of your dream.
Kadmiel's face filled with anticipation at what the old man would say.
To begin with, I will tell you that the wisdom of the living God is in the simplicity of understanding his eternal power and divinity, which can be seen through nature and what he has created. Surely the desert you saw in your dream is the world. You would be surprised to know the aridity of it and the loneliness in which its inhabitants live. Your seed is your vocation, which must be sown in this world. Otherwise, it will eventually die in your hands and be lost forever. Yet you must know that the seed will not bear fruit in the wilderness, except by divine intervention. This then is the cornerstone upon which you must base your vocation. You must seek the Most High at all times, for like the sower, your work will be to cast the seed into the ground, and his power will cause the seed to sprout and the tree to grow, without your knowing how. Now, the great exchange will take place when you cease to pursue your own interests. Otherwise, your vocation, and the happiness it produces, will always elude you. But when you seek to serve others, your vocation will germinate and grow to benefit many. The greatness of your vocation will know no bounds, as long as you understand the wisdom that exists in the exchange of your interests for those of others. Finally, a new nature will be born in you, when your heartbeat will have a meaning far greater than yourself, to satisfy the hungry, and to shade those who are about to perish because of the aridity of this world. The Most High will make a way in the desert and rivers in the barren land, if you let him.
When Amitai had finished speaking, the rain ceased, and a great silence enveloped them while they were in that hut. And it came to pass that after that silence, the boy interrupted and said,
How important is this message, and how difficult it will be for me to understand it? Am I not an insignificant being to carry it out? Am I a superior being to others?
Then Amitai said,
The real power is in the simplicity of the message you carry. You will always achieve your desires if you avert your eyes from the obstacles. In this case, it is not a question of understanding your vocation, for your reason will set limits to it. It is about believing that the one who gave it to you is powerful to fulfill it. I am persuaded that this is the great message you must give to the world. We were all created with a great idea in mind. We must only discover it, and with determination and courage give ourselves to carry it out.
When Amitai finished speaking, he stood up and hugged the boy goodbye and said,
Keep working for your dreams, my son. Don't lose heart. I thank you for coming, because thanks to your dreams, I have been able to remember that existence is only colorful when it is tinged with them. Embrace your vocation and do not let go of it, for if it thrills you just thinking about it, imagine living it.
With that said, Eleazar and Kadmiel said goodbye and left Amitai's vineyard, returning to Eleazar's house. Kadmiel's thoughts. When they arrived home, Eleazar silently went up to his room, and Kadmiel stayed outside to appreciate the night. It was a clear night, and the full moon was clearly visible on the horizon. Then Kadmiel remembered that the last time he had seen a night like that, he had been at home with his grandmother and mother in another country. Lost in thought, Kadmiel vowed to himself,
Listen, O moon, and let the stars listen. For before me, like the sun in the morning and like the moon in the clear night, two different ways have been revealed. The first, like the noonday sun, shines, and nothing escapes its heat. Surely this is the path the Most High has laid out for me, on which I will shine with my own light, as I give myself completely to my vocation until my life burns with love and is consumed. On the other hand, if I do not give myself to my vocation and to God's plan, I will be like the moon that shines by reflecting the light of the sun. In the same way, I will only reflect the light of those who decided to give themselves boldly to their vocation. And as a result, I will be at the mercy of the life and plans that others invent for me. But what, then, will I do with my vocation and with the call of the Most High? I will pursue them until I attain them, for I am persuaded that if I desire something with all my heart, creation will eventually reveal to me the way to fulfill them. I will not be like those who invest their efforts to find an excuse. I will risk declaring my dreams even if I meet many antagonists in doing so. I will persist resist, and not give up to achieve my desire. I will always hold on to hope so that I will not set my eyes on obstacles. I will love my vocation because the greater my love for it, the lesser will be the gap between me and its realization. Today I determined to please God through my vocation, by never yielding to the limitations that others prescribe for me. For I have only one opportunity, the limit of which is my existence, and as such I am the only one in charge of making it worthwhile, being profitable to nature. I will walk my path, leaving footprints for others to follow. For what is the point of living without others knowing my experience? I will be an apprentice to share all my learning during the days of my pilgrimage. Who will understand this path in a few words? This is why it is necessary to speak in the simplicity of my actions, and only then will not many words be needed. I will call upon God every day as long as there is life in me, and the breath of the living God is within me. I will sow my seed in arid soil, though its growth does not depend on me. I will water with faith and hope until it somehow germinates. Then I will rejoice that the beating of my heart will at last give life to my dream, tree that with its shade shall shelter the desert dweller, and with its fruit give to all who come near its sustenance. My lips shall utter this oath in faith, as I feed on the promises of God. And it shall come to pass, as I eat and drink of the promise of the Most High, like the rosy moth, I shall change the color and appearance of my skin. A new nature shall sprout, bringing with it beauty. The great exchange will be manifest to the world, when my fears will leaving space for my vocation to live, and my dreams to be fulfilled. This then is the wisdom of the living God and the cornerstone upon which I will build my existence.
So Kadmiel was left alone to meditate, and he discoursed at length until the break of day. Then he went into the house and took his things, and took leave of Eleazar, and went to Malka's field to continue to graze the goats and to keep the flocks at night. Kadmiel returns with Malka. Kadmiel returned to Malka's camp and went in search of Atzel, the steward in charge of the whole camp, and handed him a letter that Eleazar had sent to his mistress. But when several servants of the camp heard of it, they were extremely annoyed that he had returned to work with them. After he had been there 3 days, Atzel took him as his right hand, so that Kadmiel would declare to him every matter that required his attention concerning the state of the flock and the conduct of the other watchmen. But when Yitzchak, born and bred in Ajanta, India, and Kinor from Singidunum, saw him, they opposed him and despised him, saying,
"Shall a foreigner from Bozum rule over us? Shall one from the kingdom of Sheba or Axum rise up over us?"
And in retaliation, Kadmiel would report to Atzel about his misbehavior in the camp. Moreover also, Kadmiel became more hateful before them, for he told many of his dreams, until by his mouth or by hearsay, all learned of them. Then the envy of many grew, and at all times they sought occasion to accuse him in regard to any matter in the camp. Nevertheless, the young man continued to work hard, and willingly studied the language of that region, being educated by Atzel. Thus 2 months passed, and Kadmiel's strength waned, until his weariness was joined by apathy and disenchantment with what he was doing. When winter came, the time when the workers and servants went out to rest, Kadmiel was left all alone and became very depressed. One evening, on getting out of bed, he began to wander about Eleazar's house, and from the window he saw many men and women eating and drinking. After long pondering, due to idleness and his continued depression, he decided that he would go to this celebration. So he went out and went to the place. He ate and drank until he became drunk. When he had regained consciousness, even before he opened his eyes, he heard the taunts of Yitzchak and Kinor, who had been told by other servants in the field where they would find Kadmiel in his drunkenness. He got up and laughed with them, so that the rumors reached the ears of Eleazar and Atzel. A few days after that quarrel, Kadmiel returned to Malka's camp to continue his work, and saw 2 workers quarreling with each other. So he stepped between them and said,
Why are you quarreling? Go back to your work.
And the servant said to him,
"By what authority do you say this to us, and do you intend to quarrel with us as you did with Yitzchak and Kinner?"
Then the young man was filled with fear, realizing that everyone in the camp had heard of his misbehavior. The days went by, and Kadmiel's work became more and more burdensome. For when the servants saw him from afar, they would say to each other loud enough for him to hear,
Odd, look at the drunkard and dreamer.
And they insulted him so that his strength to continue his labors declined. One day at dusk, the frustrated young man stood silently watching the sand and the setting of the sun. As he did so, he noticed a large curtain of sand, which could be seen in the distance by the passing animals of an approaching caravan. The young man stared at it until it came close enough to where he was standing, and it so happened that the caravan belonged to Malka, who had returned from a long journey to the land of Egypt. At last he realized what a fool he had been, and thought,
In my grandmother's and my mother's house, they will always welcome me with open arms. And both Asael and Raphael will welcome me back to the fields, being chief explorer. What am I doing here in a strange land, enduring the taunts and insults of those who work in this field? I will seek out Malka and apologize to her for my failure. Then I will go to Eleazar and apologize in the same way for wasting his time. Finally, I will return to my land and kindred, so that my soul will no longer be submerged in this painful bitterness. I will no longer be confused with terror and dread before those who love my evil.
Then Kadmiel rose and marched off to Malka's camp. While he was still far away, Malka sent his steward Atzel to receive him, so that he might eat and rest, and join him when he sent for him. Thus Kadmiel was in Atzel's care, learning the language of that region and eventually befriending him, for he willingly accompanied him in all his tasks. In this way, Atzel also learned about Kadmiel's dreams and the interpretation of the inscriptions and the papyrus.